Hi there. This is my policy project for GSWS 350. It is concerning washroom accessibility in the city of Vancouver. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump right into it then. So, washroom accessibility, a cause for concern? Well, I'm glad you asked. Urban centers are seriously lacking in public washroom accessibility. Unfortunately, Vancouver is no exception to this phenomenon. Vancouver has had very poor public washroom access, with more residential areas, suburban areas, being particularly alarming in their levels of accessibility. And you can see this on the map provided on the right. The problem is further exacerbated by the exclusion of public washrooms in transportation centers such as SkyTrain stations that could be utilized in solving the problem. So, washroom accessibility, therefore, and I really want to stress this, is a human rights issue that disproportionately affects marginalized groups. Lack of washrooms is more likely to affect the homeless, women, and those with disabilities, whether they be visible or not. And when I say that, I'm primarily talking about gastroenterological disabilities. Therefore, it is critical in understanding that this is an issue of human rights and social justice and should be evaluated through those lenses. So, marginalized groups and the needs for accessible washrooms. Washroom accessibility, as we've stated, is a human rights issue that disproportionately affects marginalized groups. Therefore, lack of accessible public washrooms needs to be evaluated under a feminist lens. Lack of public washrooms affects the homeless, women, and disabled individuals the most. Those without a home evidently still need access to some form of a public washroom and are often forced to use parks, alleys, and other public places in lieu of this. Homeless people are just like everybody else. They have basic bodily functions and need to relieve themselves accordingly. Women are more likely to have gastroenterological disorders, notably. Women who are menstruating also obviously need washroom accessibility in order to maintain standards of hygiene. Finally, those with gastroenterological disorders or other conditions that require frequent access to a washroom are challenged by this problem. So, lacking washroom accessibility constrains marginalized groups. Individuals who need reliable, safe, and accessible access to washrooms are restricted severely in environments that do not contain them. Women, in particular, are housebound via poor city planning in more suburban areas, if we've seen in the last few decades here. Suburban areas are particularly guilty of this phenomenon of poor city planning, with washrooms and other basic amenities such as restaurants, grocery stores, rec centers, doctors' offices severely lacking in the immediate area. This, therefore, creates an issue of accessibility for women and those with disabilities, keeping them more likely to stay in their home or neighborhood or immediate area, further domesticating this group and keeping them out of the urban center. So that brings us to the question, what exactly is Vancouver doing to resolve the issue of washroom accessibility? So let's see. All right, so let's do an examination here of the park's washroom strategy by the Vancouver Board of Parks and Recreation. So, notably, this is a very, very new document and just turned 2 years old in the past recent days. So, I think it's important to mention that it's still in the very early cycles of its implementation. So, the document outlines the way in which the Vancouver Board of Parks and Recreation plans on correcting the issue of washroom accessibility in the city of Vancouver. It is the most active and most recent, if we exclude the Vancouver Plan, which was made very recently in 2022, attempt by the city in resolving washroom accessibility. The strategy provides its four-step approach to how it plans to tackle the issue, and I will list these now. Number one, to develop a system for renewing and building new facilities. Number two, to identify underserved areas and prioritize their needs. Number three, to establish park washroom design recommendations for clean and safe washrooms. And finally, number four, to establish park washroom design recommendations for clean and safe washrooms. Okay, so I think we should go ahead and delve a little deeper into the park's washroom strategy via further examination. So, what exactly is the rationale of the park's washroom strategy? That being, what does it hope to achieve? So, the Vancouver Board of Parks and Recreation states in the park washroom strategy the desire for increased washroom accessibility is, quote, driven by the need for facility renewal, expected population and tourism growth, and changing services needs, the park board initiated a planning process to establish a long term vision for washroom facilities and parks. And I think there's a lot of truth to this statement. Obviously, Vancouver is a growing city and it will continue to grow. And following the COVID-19 pandemic, we're expected to see more of a tourism boom. So it's great to be prepared for those things. So, who exactly is responsible for the success of this strategy? So, that would be, of course, the Vancouver Board of Parks and Recreation will oversee the implementation of the strategy, whether it be successful or not. In succeeding with these goals, parks will assume the responsibility, or at least some partial responsibility, for achieving washroom accessibility in the city of Vancouver. So that brings us to who does the strategy affect? So an internal working group was created in order to craft the document, including individuals from, and this is taken directly from the strategy, commercial operations, park developments, access and inclusion, planning and research, recreation, new building services, aka janitorial, engineering, that being City of Vancouver Public Spaces and Street Use Division, REFEM, which is City of Vancouver, social policy, City of Vancouver, and strategic initiatives, also from the City of Vancouver. Also, the Vancouver Police Department, the Vancouver Fire and Rescue Services, and the City Protective Services. Okay, so now that we have a basic understanding of the gist of the strategy, let's delve into more of a criticism and a more thorough analysis of the actual strategy through the flaws in the park's washroom strategy. So, does the strategy go far enough? How has it fared in the 2 years since its release? There has been some criticism, perhaps fairly warranted, that the strategy does not go far enough, a point that I personally agree with. For example, one of the key goals set forth in the project was to set aside funding every 4 years towards upgrading 10 facilities. That would equate to 50 improved, I want to stress improved, not new park washrooms by 2042. And that's really not a lot. In a growing metropolis such as Vancouver, such a goal is uninspiring at best and evidence of intentional ignorance towards the growing public washroom crisis at its worst. It just doesn't go far enough. I also thought it would be wise to delve a bit into the local media's perception surrounding the strategy. How did the media portray the issue? How did it portray the park's washroom strategy? So, much to my surprise, the media's response has been largely positive. Outlets such as the Vancouver Sun and the Daily Hive produce mostly positive articles presenting the Board of Parks and Recreation's plan as a sincere effort in correcting the washroom issue. This really came as a shock to me, seeing as how poorly the strategy was received in the comment sections, as well as other platforms such as Twitter, and my own personal opinion regarding the analysis of the strategy. So perhaps this is an attempt to present the objective goals of the strategy, maybe without turning it into a more critical think piece on behalf of the media articles. And I also want to point out that notably, almost all of the news articles surrounding the park's washroom strategy were published just days after its implementation. So there hasn't been any recent updates, at least not in the past 6 months. It's all mostly been articles just following the month, typically the week after the implementation. So hopefully we will see a more thoughtful analysis sort of floating to the top of the plans and its successes, and also its shortcomings in the 2 years since its implementation. I also thought it would be interesting to do a quick analysis of the general public's response surrounding the strategy, seeing as how this directly affects them. And in doing so, I pulled two comments from the Vancouver Sun that I thought to be particularly insightful surrounding potential criticisms. So Jake Nonam says 17 million to do something that should cost 1/10 that amount. It took them 10 months to renovate the washrooms at Lumberman's Arch and Third Beach and Stanley Park in 2019. Not 10 days or 10 weeks, 10 months. Only Vancouver Parks Board could be that inefficient and wasteful. An efficiently run organization could have done the work in a couple of weeks. So, Jake's main quip there is obviously the length period of time that this project is going to take, And also, he does bring attention to the very high budget of 17 million. Andy Topper brings to attention, through his comment here, the goal to have 70 to 80% of washrooms in good condition or better, which means safe, clean, and accessible by 2040. Just hold it until then, lol. While a bit casual, I think this actually brings a lot of the problems of the strategy to the surface. It just doesn't go far enough. Okay, finally, here's a quick summary of my findings. So, Vancouver, like most modern urban centers, is undeniably lacking in washroom accessibility and the infrastructure surrounding it. I do believe that the park's washroom strategy is an earnest attempt by the park board in creating a more washroom accessibility in the city of Vancouver. Obviously, there has been an effort by the parks board to implement this. I'm not denying that. That being said, it does not go far enough. Policymakers and other city officials need to be challenged and made aware of the washroom crisis. We cannot be complacent in these issues of human rights. Through understanding how washroom accessibility disproportionately affects women, the homeless, and those with disabilities, an intersectional feminist lens is used in addressing the issue. It becomes an issue of social justice when we apply these methods. The solution to the washroom crisis needs to be taken seriously, needs to take these ideas into account in order to be successful, truly successful amongst the groups like myself that need it the most. Otherwise, we will see further marginalization of these marginalized groups, and we will see further domestication of these marginalized groups. Okay, finally, here are my references. Thank you so much for listening.